these aren't great.
Oh, these are falling columns.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's called the
Body inside.
Wow. Wow, Rabbi Marcus.
Where's this gentleman? The guys from my share should just know that when I'm here. Okay. Yeah, I'm just my heart's.
I know. That's why.
We don't have much time. I know we have to run.
No, we don't.
I know, but
That's why I did this. I don't want to run.
yeah,
I don't want to run.
okay,
I don't
fine.
wanna run. We're okay.
Fine.
Is anybody? Are we waiting for anybody still?
There's some boys that are still behind.
Are they intentionally behind? They don't want to
There's
go.
about in here.
Okay, well, let's wait for them. Then.
About 6, 8.
Yeah.
Right away, they'll be here in 2 minutes.
Yeah, we'll also give them a chance.
Within a
in
minute.
second.
Within a minute, they'll be here.
I don't know which one's the tombstone over there. I don't know if that's also a tombstone. You can sit there, but
Careful not to lean.
And really see
You lean on the wall.
his.
Yeah.
Explain who each one is.
I'll try to sort it out and then we'll get going.
yeah.
Are we all here, Ben? Are you the last?
We're gonna take the mic off.
Let's try to leave a space, step
No,
back
keep it
as
on
much
there,
as
keep
we
it on
can
there.
so everybody has at
Keep it
least
on,
some
just
ability to see. If you're in the front, maybe try to, if you can, make space around the side. Yes, scoot in a little bit, that's a great idea.
There's one guy squeezing over here. It's extra light.
Yeah, right?
Just before everyone starts and just gives you all the background, I just want to tell you guys that anything, if you've ever learned anything from me, right, this is directly from here.
Oh, I was going to say
Shali
bigger.
v'shalachem shalom hi. I don't know how to say that properly.
Well, that's what Rebbe Akiva says to the students who want to distance them from his wife. Everything is hers.
Right.
She gave,
Exactly.
she made it possible.
This is where all my Torah comes from. This is everything. My way of thinking, my way of understanding is all from right here. But
I have to
the
disagree
background-
with you, Rebbe Marcus. And it's good and appropriate to disagree by the Rav Chaim and
Right.
Netziv, right? Because I think the Jewish world today and the yeshiva, the Derech Halimud, the Brisker Derech Halimud, is the way yeshivas work in the world today. I don't think that's an exaggeration. To say that I will explain, but let's at least open up to understand the significance of where you stand right now.
Being anxious from the build-up, right?
Good, you should feel that. Those of you on the outside, I think you might want to hear this. You don't have to.
I'm listening, Rabbi.
Great.
Daniel, come join us, Daniel.
And maybe close the door.
Yes, come
Close
in.
the door. We retain the body
It'll
heat.
be warmer, and it's also
So the Vilna Gaon, if they really go back, the Vilna Gaon, as we visited last year, to a large degree set the mold of Torah learning in the world. His stature, his personality, everything about him, of course, was immense. And as Rav Aaron Kotler said, any attempt to assess him inevitably fails. Based on his learning, which is of course a repository of the whole Messiah of the Torah, his Talmid Rav Chaim of Volozhin, the ancestor both in Netziv and Rav Chaim Brisker, in front of us here, started what's called the yeshiva movement. Now, there were yeshivas in the world beforehand, obviously. Jews have been sustained through their Torah learning. But a lot of the time, the yeshivas were so poor, as long before yeshivas Chachmei Lublin, that it was a Rebbe, his Talmidim, sitting around the Rebbe's dining room table, maybe, if they had enough money to have a dining room table, maybe in the base medrash. They had a sefer between the 10 of them. That's why, if I'm learning, and let's say I'm the one teaching, so Ben, you actually become expert in learning the text upside down, and David, you become really good at doing it sideways, right? As they held their precious manuscripts. Came Rav Chaim and proposed an idea, and this, of course, in the face of immense conflict brewing between the Jews. As we keep saying, the Enlightenment, the secularism, the Reform movement rising up in the same period that he started Volozhin, the great yeshiva, the first Reform synagogue in Gießen, Germany, opened its doors. And so he's battling the Reform on the West and the Hasidim, this new firebrand movement in their midst in Eastern Europe, trying to create a new model of what a yeshiva bachur would be. It was the first idea of attracting students internationally and making it competitive and exciting to get in. What we heard yesterday about Rav Meir Shapiro was really drawing from this original model of the yeshiva movement, and thus was born Volozhin, who opened the doors also in the early 1800s. And the giants who studied in Volozhin, it was the fundamental yeshiva that everybody wanted to get into, and not everybody succeeded in doing so. And two of the great lights who both led the yeshiva at different points, a little complicated, their history are in front of us, and we'll say, you realize whatever we say is almost an insult. How do we contain such lives? But we'll do our best because we should at least have some sense. I'll start with the Netziv, who was older, and I actually double-checked this. In his own account, maybe he was just being modest, he didn't consider himself a particularly talented youngster in learning, and he said that they were about to give up on him. He was in the lower half of the students, and in those days, many of the Jews were so poor that to stay in learning full-time when you reached the old age of 11 or 12 was a little bit out of reach. Boys had to go to work on the farm. And that was discussed in the case of Naftali Tzvi Yehuda of Berlin, right? That's the acronym of Netziv. But he persevered. He wanted to continue. And if you know the brisa that tells the story of Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus Hagadol, it's a similar kind of a story where he was working on the farm too, but he was crying the whole time, I want to learn Torah. And he cried so much that he became Gadol Hador. So the Netziv applied himself, and at 37 became the youngest Rosh Yeshiva of Volozhin, 25 years after they almost gave up on him. And they asked him, well, how'd you do it? I mean, did you 24/7, it was 20 hours a day in the base measures, how could you accomplish as much? Ben, how can you actually achieve the ability of these Gedolim for starting so late in life? He said, no, it wasn't 20 hours a day. He said it was 15 hours a day. But 15 was 15, except Tisha B'Av. He sat Hasmada with Sitzfleisch. He broke out on the scene with the publication of an original work called the Emek She'ela. No, excuse me. Yeah, the Emek She'ela. No, what am I thinking? Emek Davar, thank you very much. Emek Davar. Right, Emek Davar on a Perush on an old work of Gaonim. Gaonim, you remember?
Oh, no, that's Emek She'ela.
That's what Emek She'ela. Yeah, I was right. Yeah, Emek She'ela.
That's the first one.
Yeah, right. Emek Davar we'll get to. Right, Emek She'ela was a work, this is his breakout work. That suddenly everybody looked after, who wrote this? On an old work of Rav Achai Gaon, one of the earlier Gaonim, just if that's an unfamiliar term, you have the Talmudic era, that's the Gemaras, who are the people we describe from the period of the Gemara? They're the
Amoraim.
Tanaim are the Mishnah period, then Amoraim of the Gemara period. The very short period of the editors of the final text of the Gemara, that's the Savarim, followed by the Gaonim. One of the earlier Gaonim was Rav Achai Gaon, who wrote the She'iltos, collections of Shilas and Shuvas, that was updated, annotated, and commented on by the Netziv, and made accessible really for the first time in the contemporary world of the 19th century, and broke out as a major accomplishment. And one thing led to the next, and everybody recognized that they had a Gadol in their midst. And I don't know what other people picture about the Netziv, but he was fine and refined, and he had an aura about him. And I'll jump to the end. We'll fill in the bits. I'm giving just the overview of their lives. There was a conflict in the leadership between the two. We'll talk about Rav Chaim Soloveitchik too. There was a conflict, not between them. They were related, And they, some of their followers didn't always behave themselves, and they split. They split. And the Netziv remained in Volozhin. Rav Chaim went off to Brisk, which is Brest-Litovsk, different area, and they each continued great yeshivas. And the Netziv actually was the head of the yeshiva all the way through the rest of his life until 1892. These were hard, dark times. Tsarist Russia, where the yeshiva was located in its borders, was going out for the Jews, and they knew to go to the jugular was to get them where they learned. That's how you get the Jew. And they've been trying for decades to require them to have a curriculum of secular studies, which of course was just an opening. Once they're studying secular, then they'll see the greatness of the secular world, and one thing will lead to the next. And he was not having any of it, and he resisted with diminishing returns until 1892, and the decree was issued as law that the yeshiva, to hold its doors open, must feature a predominant curriculum of secular studies, which was meant to acculturate the Jews learning in yeshiva. And the Netziv made the fateful decision to close the doors. He did it in the middle of the yeshiva year. You have to realize the implications of that. All the boys came from all over Europe. They didn't have money, so he personally had to pay for their train fare to get back. He was in debt because he paid from his own pocket so they can get home. Suddenly, unexpectedly, when they closed the doors, and they asked him. It wasn't an easy situation. They said, "How could you close the doors of Volozhin? It's the end of Torah." He said, "HaKadosh Baruch Hu does what He has to do. I have to do what I have to do. I cannot compromise on Torah one whit." Right? A person with bitachon understands Hashem runs the world. If you want to do the right thing, you can never compromise on Torah in order to keep the Torah. The decision, it said, broke him, and within a year he had died. His legacy is quite immense. I'll say this. Rav Chaim came already from an illustrious family, descendant of Rav Chaim of Volozhin. Two Rav Chaims, yeah? So you can kind of keep it distinct. Rav Chaim of Volozhin was a student of the Vilna Gaon, and a couple generations later, Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, the son of the Beis Halevi. You might know perhaps the Beis Halevi, one of his claims to fame, with many, he was already one of the Gedolim. He decisively refuted the Medzhybizher Rebbe, one of the students of the Kutzker, to try to connect some of the dots of our time together. He had a really interesting, great story of he felt he had rediscovered Tchelis. And the world was very much as a buzz around this until the Beis Halevi, Rav Chaim's father, published a definitive refutation. This is not Tchelis, period. And that put an end to it. Nobody really, a couple exceptions to this rule, but nobody really took the Ritzinner. The Tchelis in the world today is not the Ritzinners. It's the Murex trunculus. It's a different strain, different source, different sea creature. The Rav Chaim was born then to this illustrious family, and not everybody was born to such a family. You realize it's hard to be a child of a gadol. We saw that we saw that with Rav Chaim Sofer. He too was on his own terms a gadol. Not easy to be the son of Chaim Sofer, and he rose to it. It's really Rav Chaim's shita of learning, his approach to learning, that we're going to hear some about now, that really captivated a generation. His idea wasn't original exactly, but he really epitomizes this, is to, with great intellectual honesty and rigor, to try to understand all of Torah, all of halacha, to its end in the most precise fashion that's possible. He did it by way of the Mishnah Torah of the Rambam, with a heavy focus on the Mishnah Torah. His chidushim were compiled. Perhaps you've learned them. Have you taken them off the shelf this year?
Not yet.
Anybody familiar? Anybody learn the chidushim? You'll go to the bookshelf and you'll see this monumental masterpiece of one of the great lights of the Torah. And if you're not careful, it might slip through your fingers as you're holding it. It's so slender. Because every single word, and this is of course emblematic of his approach, was carefully considered. So much so it was said about him that he'd wake in the middle of the night and run downstairs to correct a word, to make sure that his rendition of an interpretation and explanation of the Torah was just so. His intellectual honesty was self. He could care less about his own ego, unlike most of us. He'd be in the middle of a shiur, or he'd be at the beginning of his year, and actually this is the version I know, he'd be at the beginning of his year, and a student would ask him a kasha. And he had the best students that Europe could offer. And at least at one or two occasions, he paused. The shirim in those days, they went on about 3 hours. That was your main bread and butter of yeshiva life. You sat and you listened with rapt attention. No phones then, and no spacing out either. They could sit and listen for 3 hours. Imagine that generation. So far removed from ours, and they're pretty close. He got up then, he heard the kasha, and he said, "Shir's canceled for today. I have to rethink everything." That's embarrassing, at least for most of us. You know, a student undone by a student, he didn't care. Didn't stop there. He was, when we say he's the real thing, he was Torah and mitzvos and midos. He was about chesed. Of course, everybody recognizes godless. Listen to this. So much so, his corridor outside his home, he didn't have a minute's rest, barely slept. But outside his home was the most motley mix of people. If you're trying to form an image of Jews now at the end of the 19th century, when he lived in the early 20th century, it was Amcha, it was everybody. The most assimilated Janis Korchaks, all the way to some of the most distinguished Talmidei Chachamim, and everybody in between. And everybody needed his ear, and he lent it to everybody. So much so, merchants know that it was such a well-visited place. They would put their pachkevilim, you know that word? Great Yiddish word. You see them all up around Mea Sharim. They don't have advertisers. They don't have, right? So they don't have billboards. So instead you put up your sign advertising your wares. And they did it in the corridor outside Rav Chaim's house. Because it was known that everybody would see it. I'll leave the floor in a moment. In a moment, I'll just say this. There's a time of great movement and persecution, but also opportunity. It's such a confusing time to be alive. I mean, the Industrial Revolution is building to the height. The change in the technology, it's hard. It's dizzying. We know it is today, and it was then too. Hard to keep up with the latest invention, the latest innovation. The Jews going off the Derech in scores. The infusion of academic life. It did not skip Volozhin. Some of the famous Jews of Volozhin were actually Noshrim, were people who went off the Derech. If you know, the poet laureate of the secular state of Israel, Chaim Bialik, was one of the heralded students at Volozhin. And many other intellectuals went to Volozhin because they wanted the top Torah education to complement what they were pursuing privately on the side, their own academic, secular education that ultimately led many of them off the Derech.
Geiger as well, right? Abraham Geiger?
No, Geiger was a different story. Geiger, who's considered the intellectual founder of the Reform movement, he sort of predates us. He's really in the early 1800s. He learned it for a month when he was in the University of Bonn with Rav Shimshon Farel Hirsch. They learned Zvachim together, right? Before he went totally off the Derech and really went into Reform. But like that, you're right to associate with Geiger, because that was the atmosphere of Volozhin. It was so intellectually primed that sometimes you got people who didn't have the ear at Shemaim. So the point I was going to make was this: one of the things that was very much being discussed. We mentioned this by the Sam Sofer, but then we mentioned a lot of things. Was the discussion of Jewish life in Palestine, nationalism. We take it for granted that people are nationalistic today in the world. Nationalism.
What does that mean?
That you suddenly now, and this means Jews, non-Jews, that you suddenly now identify not just an individual and not just as a family and not just as a tribe, but actually somebody who belongs to a nation. That's a modern definition of people. In the pre-modern world, people identified, as I said, as a person, as a tribe, perhaps. The Jewish people always a nation, but rarely did you find that. There weren't people who were proud Frenchmen, or I am an American. But the American Revolution that brought a certain pride, the French Revolution that brought that sense of French. I'm a Frenchman and only laterally a Jew, and so many assimilated French Jews in their story. That was a new idea, and the Jews were catching on to that. Hey, we've been a nation long before any of these people were nations. And a movement, and we talked about by the Sam Sofer, one of his students from Tzvi Kalisher, who was saying, hey, yeah, we too. And we should have our own settlement in Palestine and a military, and we should bring korbanos again. You remember those conclusions were controversial. The Sam Sofer loved the initiative, didn't agree with the halachic conclusions. But Rav Tzvir Kalisher was together in an early organization called the Chibat Sion, Chovei Sion, together with both the Netziv, Rav Chaim, and Rav Gordon from Telz, and many of the other lights, the luminaries of this time. And they were part of Chovei Sion, which later changed its name to
Zionist movement.
Zionism. The Zionist movement was originally made up of Gedolei Hador. And when the secular moved in, most of the great rabbis moved away. They said this can't be a secular institution. This can only be a return to our homeland, can only be done under the circumstances of a renewal of Torah observance, of tshuva, mass tshuva of the Jewish people. It cannot take the direction that the Jewish world is taking. And both the Netziv and Rav Chaim stepped away from, even when it was still Chovei Sion. Rav Chaim particularly became one of the outspoken early voices. You'd call him anti-Zionist today. He wouldn't know what the Torah Karta were. But he was inflamed on the subject. He felt that this could be the death of the Jews. What are the implications of a secular state? You have a secular state, who knows? The Arabs around them may not take well to it. They may even attack them and kill them mercilessly. They had never done in centuries. I'm saying. But they had that notion. It shouldn't be said, somebody who's anti-Zionist, we have all kinds of associations, that doesn't mean that they were anti-Eretz Yisrael. And in the case of the Netziv, when they brought the first bottle of wine back from Rishon LeZion, the first bottle that was cultivated by Jews in the modern day, do you realize the implications of this? They brought it to Volozhin, and the Netziv, he said he was gripped with emotion. He ran back into his room, came back dressed in his finest Shabbos clothes. It was a regular weekday. He said, to taste the wine that Jews cultivated in Eretz HaKodesh is an occasion. He said, I envy them. I want to stand in their footsteps. He assumed they were all Shomer Torah and mitzvos. He brought the Gemara in Sanhedrin Sadi Ches Amud Aleph, that there's no greater siman of a revival that could lead the Aschalta, the Geula, the footsteps of the Messianic era. And he said with great emotion, the bracha, Pri Hagafen.
I'm not speaking long, and I know that looking around, everyone's in dire straits over here. Just looking at the floor. Yeah.
No, the shamas are on fire. Don't worry.
So just one thing that I will tell you that I got from my Rosh Yeshiva. I remember once there was a very outspoken English boy who was very inquisitive, asked a lot of questions. And he went up to Rosh Yeshiva. He said, "Okay, Rebbe." He was always asking him, what does he do in his private life? And he said, "Rebbe, you wouldn't want to take off a day and just go on a skiing trip?" And I remember I was in the lunchroom, and my Rosh Yeshiva just exploded. Not exploded in a bad way, but he said to him, "You don't understand. You can take me on any trip in the world, and it won't add up to one word of Rav Chaim. It won't add up to one taisus. It won't add up to one. I don't want, if you want to talk to me about ultimate enjoyment, that's in the Torah." And he would talk about his revered great-grandfather as his model of, there's no such thing. Rav Chaim was able, they talk about that Rav Chaim would sit down in a room and there'd be thunder and lightning outside and everyone make a bracha and he wouldn't move. They talk about that there'd be a noise and he wouldn't move because once he was locked into his Torah, there was nothing else going on. He's an epitome for me of just what it means to really, really enjoy Olam Hazeh. Olam Hazeh for a Jew in Limud Torah, in the proper forms of Limud Torah. Yes, you got to enjoy your food and enjoy everything else. Hashem gave it to you to enjoy in order for you to be able to serve Hashem more. But this is the place where for me is like, okay, Lulei Soros Chashashuai, right? The Torah, if it wasn't that it was something I could play with, something I could enjoy, I'd be lost. I'd be lost in my poorness. We're rich. We're wealthy. We own more than anybody else. It's not our Audi R8s, and it's not our fancy cars, our fancy houses. We have such a rich Torah that was passed down through them. As a Hashem, we should continue living by it.
You mentioned Lake Soros Shuai. It's to combine as we're here, hearing from Rav Domsk, and I talked about my wife's grandfather. That's what I spoke about by his hesped, because as a Rav Domsk Chassid, coming from Europe, his Torah was his toy. It was angelic, it was enjoyable. I remember waking up on my wife's house after we were married. He was in the sukkah. Enjoyment, and the Rabbi spoke about the pilpul of Polish Torah. Pilpul, and as questionable as it was, in a certain sense, it came from
Shashuim.
It was just tying things together. And look at this, whether it's pshat, whether it's rebbe's, whether it's drus, it's just like this and like this. Almost like maybe sometimes you hear. As we get a little older, we're doing it also. Oh, you're related to him, and this Jewish geography. So these greats, their Jewish geography, call it Torah geography. Oh, there's this Torah there. Well, that's like the Gemara over there, and that's like the Mordechai in a Shabbos, and bring it together in a Pshat and a Rashi and a Ramban. All the shashuai, the enjoyment, the light. It's ice cream. It's delicious. And connect this and connect that, and it's just, and in a certain sense, that's something that I received in different angle. I mean, my wife's grandfather was as I was married, but beforehand, in my years in Yeshiva University, learning from Chashiv Yid with a uniformist, he should have a Fuhr Shalema, who's a Talmud, which should be able from the.
Chaim Brister's father was with me in that share too.
Okay, right. So Talmud B'Shoshaber, his precision. It's clarity, and it's something that we emphasize. There's nothing more enjoyable than clarity. Almost like, I must say actually a year ago or 2 years ago, Thomas took me to actually the Radomsker Rebbe's, someone from Radomsk, was a Rebbe of my wife's grandfather, is buried over there. He took me there. I got caught in Tila, and then I was alone at a very late night, 1 o'clock in the morning, and I had no idea what anybody was. It was scary, I had no idea. But then someone pointed my way, and it was clarity. You feel good when there's clarity. If you're lost, you feel good with clarity. So too in Torah, or any chachma, but lahavdi, but certainly in Torah, clarity brings enjoyment and a delight.
Hearing you, I'm so corrected. I've been wrong all these years, and for many of you, I really apologize. I always say, how do you say fun in Hebrew? And then you say, Kobe, how do you say fun in Hebrew? Remember?
Kef.
But that's Arabic, so there's no word for fun in Hebrew because we're all about simcha. But I'm so corrected here listening to Rabbi Greenwald. The way you say fun in Hebrew is Torah.
I'm not sure where it came from. Ein simcha k'ataras asvekas. Is that something within? In the word
clarifying our doubts.
Clarifying, and thereby with a Rambam, it's getting to the idea of svei dinim, two way. There's this way. It's so clear, and thereby you see the beauty of a machlokes actually. That's l'shem, because each one is so clear. I received that a lot, not as closely, I must say, as Ray Marcus, who was for Shiva, is in the family. But in my experience from my Rebbeim who are Talmidim, that's something that I carry with me as well. The enjoyment of clarity and the goal of clarity.
And you have to realize that it goes along together with the whole life. Rav Chaim was a legendary Baal Chesed. There were two, not one, fires in Brisk. And the second one, they feared the worst. Rav Chaim disappeared. And in a burning house that was all but finished, suddenly somebody saw a figure running out, but it wasn't just one figure. He had a child under each arm. and it was an elderly Rav Chaim saving the life of 2 children. He ran in risking his life to change them. That was the malus of the person. It was Torah, and it was before.
I think you're reminding me, what Barnes told me, that the goal of a Rav, like Moshe Rabbeinu, is to take care of his people. Take care of them. He wants to take care of them. If you're a Rav in Klal Yisrael, not just for your Torah, take care of the people. That's me some of this. It goes together.
There's a lot more.
Rav, what's top Shalom Tzaddik?
On every kever, you should know. You should have this basic Jewish knowledge. Po Nikbar. Here it's buried, and then they write what they write. And they're different common. Nikbar. Here is buried. The bottom is a quotation from the 25th parak of Sefer Shmuel Aleph. It's Abigail, one of the 7 women Nevios, her bracha to her not yet husband David, when she says Tiet Nishmascha Tsura B'Tzror HaChaim, your soul, she said this to him while he was alive, should be bound to the eternal bound of life. And we say that since then on every kever that's a Jewish kever.
That's written.
Yeah, right, exactly. It's written at the bottom in that abbreviation, which of course, like everything else, has pshat, remizd, drush, and sod. The Kabbalistic implications are also profound, as they always are. So I'm going to say a couple more. You don't have to stay. I'll say like one more little. This is they had a sense of humor in Volozhin. It wasn't all straight. And the Talmidi that came out of Volozhin, you have to realize, it was Rav Shimon Shkop, later from Telz, and the Brisker Rav's son, who was called the Brisker Rav, Ravel Soloveitchik, whose great stories we didn't even tell this trip, how his escape across Poland in 1941-42, and Reb Baruch Ber Leibovich were zochim to visit last year in Vilna as well, a rediscovered kever 10 years ago, and it's said, and Rav Elchanan Wasserman, who we told the story by the crematoria yesterday, it's said about it's said about Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, and it might require a little more context and understanding, but you can hear the humor on its own level, that he once taught that a table is a cow. This is not real. This is the joke that they told in Volozhin. And according to Rav Shimon Shkop, that meant that according to Rav Elvola, the son, that meant that the table had all the halachic properties, halachic properties of a cow. According to Rav Shimon Shkop, it meant that that if you rearranged all the molecules in a table, you'd come up with a cow. And Reb Baruch Ber went over and milked the table. Goes the story. That Rav Elchanan Wasserman learned in Volozhin in the heyday of the Maskilim there. There was a secret German language learning society. If they were found out by the Anhala, they would have been finished. And he was so tzmimus, he didn't realize, he was invited as a young boy to come learn German, and he didn't realize that that was not okay. He assumed anything that was happening must be l'shem shamayim, and so in the middle of the base medrash, he started practicing his German out loud, until they all jumped on him and said, "Shh, can't do that here." Anyway, Volozhin was a tumultuous place and a tumultuous time, and the luminaries knew how to fight for Torah.
I remember that I had a story with this for
Yeah.
It's very controversial when it comes to Ashkenazis, but depends what you talk about. But when Brisker was very sick.
Brisker. Now, usually, Rav Chaim Brisker is how he's usually referred to. His son is usually referred to as the Brisker Rebbe, who made it to Yerushalayim.
Yeah.
That's what you're referring to?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then about the son, he heard that he was very sick.
Rabbi, could we go to the Medzhybizher Rebbe?
I want to. Is Yola here?
They just took the keys. They just took the keys.
They took the keys.
Too good, you know.
You were told about us, obviously. And then on the way, there's like
We'll go. We'll follow
We can go.
up. Let's talk and walk. Go ahead, Jake. So what did he say? Or what did you hear?
Did you have to get there?
Not entirely.
Okay, so look at this phone there.
I recall it's around like that, like one of those. That's what I recall. So let's try to catch up with them. Jake, I want to hear.
Oh, so then the Baba Sali heard that he was very sick.
Yeah.
And that he was on his deathbed. So he said, "Brisker Rebbe on his deathbed, this can't be." So he goes and tells his
what's it called? The guy
Gabbai.
Gabbai. He told this Gabbai, poured a cup of water. He poured a cup of water. He said, "Give this to the Brisker Rebbe, and it's gonna heal him. And it's gonna heal out."
Yeah.
So when we brought all the way to the Brisker Rebbe, the Brisker Rebbe, he told him, "Oh, the sorry gave this to you, so this will kill you." And then what he did is he got up and he spilled out the cup of the water, and he said, "I don't do this."
That's classic. They asked his nephew, Rav Chaim from YU. They asked him. Somebody said, "Rebbe, could you give me a bracha?" Which is very specific kind of practice. And he said, he looked at him and he said, "What are you, an apple?" In other words, the approach in Hashkafa, underlying those things is that in Kadosh Baruch Hu's Torah and the halacha that we keep is a miracle, is magical enough. We don't need other magic tricks. It wasn't per se, you said it's against Sephardim, Chas v'Shalom, I don't think it was against Sephardim. It was against that tendency in Chassidus and sometimes the Sephardi world too.
That's what I'm saying. It's very controversial depending who you're talking to about like the reaction that you're going to get.
Oh, when you hear, because people take it personally?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. And is Yosef here? Yosef had a melody he wanted to sing. Medzhybizher is one of the Chassidus that's associated with out of this world melodies. And what are the little singers?
Read it.
זהו. אז יש לי משהו לא כל כך מוכר, שאנחנו שרים בשולחן פסח כל שנה. והיא שרת? שלום. מוכר? לא, זה לא שלום. לא מה שידעו אותי, ככה אנחנו שרים. Every year at our Pesach table we sing a Medzhybizher Vihi Sha'amda that goes like this. Vihi She'amda, try to fake it if you don't know. Vihi She'amda Lavoseinu velanu Shelo echad bilvad Omad aleinu lechaloseinu Shelo echad bilvad Omad aleinu lechaloseinu Ela shebechol dor vador Omdim aleinu lechaloseinu Ve'akadosh Baruch Hu Matzilenu miyadam Ela shebechol dor vador Omdim aleinu lechaloseinu Ve'akadosh Baruch Hu Matzilenu miyadam. מה יש לכם? אני יכול, כאילו, תתחיל ואולי נעקוב אחריך. ניגון.
ניגון?
עוד בצורה, לא?
תגיד משהו מהרבע? בבקשה.
אני אתרגם קצת. לא כל כך.
מפני לא יקסר איפה הוא
מה שאתם רוצים. We're gonna hear a word, and I'll do my best to translate. Or maybe Greenwald want to translate?
You want to ask him if he can film?
What's that?
You ask him if he can film?
זה בסדר אם נעשה את זה כאילו...
סרט.
מקליט? זה בסדר?
מצוין.
Excellent. Oh, I don't know. That I don't know. Yes, Kashmir. That's well. The Ani Mamin that we sang yesterday was written by a Medzhybizher Chassid named David Azriel Fasta, who was on the way to Treblinka when he composed. He had this melody composed. Remember, we can't after this, right? And he sent it to the right. But let's learn a little of his Torah.
ויאמר השם, ראו אירועיסי יסעור נעמי וצעקוס ומשומעתי מפני לא יקסוף.
So last week's parsha, Hashem says, I've heard the cry of my people and the desperation of their situation.
וירד להצילוי, אלא ישראל ארץ טוב ורחובו וכולי.
And I'm going to bring them out and to their holy land.
ועתו, הנה צעקס בני ישראל בואו אליי.
And their cry has come to me.
לכוירא, כבר כתוב צעקוס ומשומעתי, מקודם.
The kasha is, he'd already heard the cry earlier. What happened now? The pasuk says it already.
ועתו, הנה צעקס בני ישראל בואו אליי עוד הפעם. כן? אלא כאשר תדקדק, יש פה שתי לשוינס.
Really two different messages
בהתחלה
here.
כתוב שומעתי, כן? ואחרי זה כתוב בואו אליי.
He said first, I heard, then he said, come to me.
Oh.
No, that it came to me. I mean, the first apostle
It came
says
to me, it came
Hashem
to me.
heard the cries of Klal Yisrael,
And then it reached
says
him somehow.
That it reached him. It came to him.
עוד הבדל,
Another difference.
שם כתוב צעקו סום, ושם פה צעקס בני ישראל.
So it says it doesn't identify them, it just says their cry, and in the second one it says Bnei Yisrael, identifies whose cry.
גם שמיעה זה משהו רחוק.
So
בוא
you
אליי
hear
זה...
something, it's distant. So you hear distant from an unidentified people, whereas it came to me, it reached me, came from the Jewish people. It was personal and
בוא אליי זה
intimate.
בקרוב, ממש. אלא, אומר הדיבור ישראל בשם סבא שלו, רב חסקי מקוזמיר.
Kushmir, okay.
That's on the, I see it.
Yeah.
So the word said in the name of Yisrael is saying it in the name of his grandfather.
Kushmir.
בשם צדיק אחד. כתוב, יש פסוק בתהילים. כאלי לא מעזבתוני, רוחק משיוסי דברי שאגוסי. אז הוא אומר, זו שאלה ותשובה. זאת אומרת, כאלי לא מעזבתוני, זו שאלה.
So the question the pasuk itself includes a question and an answer. It says, my God, why have you abandoned me, as it were?
והתירוץ, רוחק משיוסי דברי שאגוסי, זאת אומרת, הוא מסביר את זה לפי משל.
Well, first of all, it means Rav Chaim see the
כן, היה מלך אחד, היה בן מלך אחד.
No, again, the end of the full pasuk.
the Rav Chaim see the Shasi that very far from my crying. Rav Chaim salvation is very far from my crying.
אז הוא אומר, היה מלך אחד, שויטה, בן מלך.
There was a son of a king who was not the brightest egg in the batch.
שהכעיס את אבא שלו,
He angered his father,
וזרק אותו מהבית.
and the father kicked him out.
והוא הלך נע ונעד בעויני, בדויחק.
Became a wanderer in great difficulty, poverty.
הוא שכח שהוא בן של המלך.
He even forgot that he was the son of the king. Ooh, that sounds so familiar.
והוא נהיה חויטה בעצם אצל כפרי אחד.
He became a water chopper by
והיה לו קרדום חלש.
He had a very weak axe. He couldn't cut the wood with it.
אבוי תספר איך לחתוב עם זה. מה הוא עשה? אז הוא כתב מכתב בקשה לאבא שלו המלך, שירחם עליו וישלח לו קרדום יותר טוב.
So he wrote to the king, please send me a better axe.
כשהמלך קיבל את המכתב הזה הוא כעס עוד יותר, זה מה שאתה מבקש? קרדום יותר טוב, שכחת מי אתה?
The king forgot, he was angry. The king was angry at the son who forgot that he was the king, and he was his son.
You asked me for an axe.
Yes, for an axe. You're my son, you forgot you're even my son.
מה אתה מחפש עם קרדום? מה אתה מחפש שמה? כן, אז עברו ימים והבן של המלך התעורר מעצמו מה שעבר עליו, הוא הזכיר לעצמו שהוא בן של המלך, ולא חסר כלום בבית של המלך. קרדום צריך, מה הוא צריך? בבית של המלך חסר
So the
משהו.
son came around to himself at one point, started to make tshuva, and he realized, I mean, in the king's house, of course, there's no lack of anything, certainly no shortages of access.
עכשיו הוא חוטב עצים אצל כפרי בדויחק. אז הוא כתב מכתב בקשה לאבא שלו, שיחזיר אותו הביתה.
So now he wrote the real cool request, which was, please bring me home. We asked for the secondary, tertiary kinds of things in life. We forget to ask for the primary thing. Please send me home, Daddy.
כשהמלך ראה את זה, אז הוא מיד ריחם אותו, כי ראה חמוב על בוני, ושלח להחזיר אותו
So the
הביתה.
father had compassion, like a father has compassion on his son, and brought him home.
זה מה שכתוב. כאלה לא מעזבתוני. למה השם לא מחזיר אותנו? התירוץ הוא רוחק מי שיוסי דברי שהגוסי. דברי שהגוסי, מה שמבקשים בבקשה, זה רחוק מהישועה.
Where's the son to be found? Wherever you let him in, right? So you gotta, he's right there. The king is right there for the son the whole time.
שישלח לו קרדום יותר טוב.
Let's go back to the pasuk.
זה לא ישוע. זה הפירוש בפסוק פה.
Oh, that's the explanation of the verse.
ויאמר השם רואי זה שתי ראיות, כן? כשעם ישראל היו בגולס מצרים, הם היו משוקעים בקוי שהשיביד.
Right. In Egypt, they were completely immersed. They'd forgotten themselves. The Ramban says they'd forgotten themselves, their whole identity. They were so overwhelmed with their pain and their labor.
הם שכחו מי, הם שכחו שהם בני אברהם, יצחק ויעקב.
They forgot their very identity as the descendants of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov.
בני מלוכים, שכחו לגמרי זה. וכל הצעקה שלהם היה מפני נויקסון. על מה צעקו? על הקרדום שלא עובד, מפני נויקסון.
Crying over nonsense, like the axe that doesn't work.
אז לכן בהתחלה
Please
כתוב...
please Hashem, let me win the basketball game, kind of stuff.
בהתחלה כתוב, צעקו שומעתי, שומעתי כי הם צעקו מפני, מה זה שומעתי? מרחוק.
So that's what Hashem, that's the two levels of the Hashem first hears from distant and some unidentified, it doesn't say Bnei Yisrael, just their cry.
כן, בהתחלה הם צעקו רק מפני נויקסון, קשה לנו בעבודה. אז זה שומעתי מרחוק, כי זה היה רוחק מי שיוסי דברי שהגוסי. אבל כמו המשל של המכתב הראשון של הבן של המלך. עד שבא זמן הגאולה והתעורר בהם מן השמיים והזכירו את עצמם אחד לשני, מי אנחנו בני מלוכים.
Geul will bring that clarity that we'll know exactly, we'll not only come before Hashem and daven, we'll know how to daven.
And we know who we are. We also know who we are, and that's why...
תזכרו שאנחנו בני ישראל. בני ישראל, אנחנו בני אברהם, יצחק ויעקב. בני ישראל, מה אנחנו עושים פה במצרים? המזוהמים האלה. עכשיו, נעתו, הנה צעקת בני ישראל, בואו אליי. זה שהם צועקים שהם בני ישראל, זה הצעקה שבאה אליי.
Then it reached Hashem when it was the Bnei Yisrael, they put back their identity. Then they knew, then the king knew, and he said, come back
כמו
to
המכתב
me.
השני של הבן של המלך, שהוא הזכיר את עצמו שהוא הבן של המלך. וזה כתוב, הוא אירועיסי, שתי ראיות. בראייה הראשונה זה היה רק מפני נויקסוב. ואז רק
And the verse says,
שומעתי.
Ra'isi, I saw a double seeing, first and second level.
כן. הראייה השנייה זה צעקת בני ישראל, זה בוא אליי.
That's the level that we have to bring it to.
מה אתה לוקח?
מה לוקחים מהרוב?
מה המסר מפני זה?
מה נמשך?
עכשיו לענייניים.
So he's going to broaden this in terms of where we're holding.
זה מבואר. להמשיך את הקטע.
בבקשה.
אז הוא אומר...
למעשה.
מה יעשה?
אז אומר לנו.
מה לא קוראים לזה מילה?
לעבוד את השם, נו, אפרים.
מה לוקחים מזה?
אנחנו צריכים לדעת שכשהקדוש ברוך הוא שולח לנו התערבות של שיבי, כן, אז מה הקדוש ברוך הוא רוצה? שנצעק, אנחנו בגלות, קשה לנו, הקדוש ברוך הוא זורק את הילד מהבית, והוא מחכה שהילד ידפוק בחזרה. הילד לא דופק, הוא צועק, קשה לי הפרנסה, קשה לי בצרות של הגלות, קשה לי. אל תשכחו, אנחנו יידיש קינדר, אנחנו בנים של הקדוש ברוך הוא, קשה לנו פה, שאנחנו רחוקים מהשולחן של אבא. תחזיר אותנו הביתה.
When we daven, we shouldn't daven. We want to pass the test, and we want to have a better yeshiva, a little bit parnasa. You want to daven to go back to Kadosh Baruch Hu, to be close to Hashem, and all your little minor problems are going to solve themselves. Your problems are only going to go, so you don't ask for another X. You have to come close to Hashem. Ask for the Geula Shlema.
That's what Hashem hears.
And that's what Hashem hears, because that's what He wants. He wants you back. He doesn't want you to give you a new axe,
realize
new
your
socks in the battlefield, and the war.
He wants you to realize the benefit.
What's the nigga? Remember that we did yesterday? No, what's the nigga? Remember we said we're gonna sing?
Here we go. Fine. This is not the Medzhybizher. This was a Medzhybizher Chassid on the way to Treblinka saying, Ani ma'amin, Ani ma'amin, Ani ma'amin, Be'emun Hashem בביאת המשיח אני מאמין. בביאת המשיח אני מאמין. אני מאמין, אני מאמין, אני מאמין. ואמונו שלמו בביאת המשיח, בביאת המשיח אני מאמין. עם כל זה אני מאמין, אף על פי שישמח, עם כל זה אני מאמין.
Digger, label digger. Label digger, budgets.
כמעט 30 שנה הייתי פה עם הנכד שלו, הנכד סדום.
Oh, wow. He was here about 30 years ago with his grandson.
וואו.
The Rebbe's grandson.
Nachlas David, Pirush al-Gemara? Nachlas David, Pirush al-Gemara? Nachlas David. Nachlas Don.
Nachlas Don is his commentary on the Torah.
His grandson.
His grandsons.
אתה היית פה איתו.
הייתי איתו פה לפני 30 שנה.
Before 30 years, he was here with the Medzhybizher Rebbe's grandson, who was at
הוא סיפר סיפור שכשהדיבור ישראל היה בסוף ימיו בבית חולים, עמדו כל החסידים באו, עמדו שם והרופא נכנס שכולם יצאו פה, זה מפריע לחולה, הוא לא יכול לנשום, חמצן.
When he was on his deathbed, so all the Hasidim crammed into the hospital room, and the doctor came in and said, "Get rid of these people. What are they doing in here? They're going to be bad for his health."
רק שהילדים נשארו.
Only the
He said
kids.
only the kids can stay.
אחרי שעה הוא חוזר, כולם בפנים.
After the doctor left, everybody stayed, because they're all his kids.
הרופא צועק, אמרתי שרק הילדים נשארו. אז הוא אומר, כולם ילדים שלי.
All my children, said the Rebbe.
Wow.
So holy, so pure, so precious.
מאיפה אתה?
אז נחלדון אמר אז, שבאנו לפה, אני אומר, כל יהודי שבא לפה, הם ידעו שהוא אמר שכולם ילדים שלו, אפשר לבקש מאבא מה שרוצים.
Everybody's one of his children. We should ask from Hashem. Great things.
הוא אומר שכשמוישה רבייני, דברי ישראל אומר, כשמוישה רבייני ירד, ויקל מוישה את כל עדת בני ישראל. זה היה אחרי שהוא ירד, זה היה 120 יום, הוא עלה לקבל את התורה בבוב, בוולפסון, חזר למוח חסימה כפירים, הוא היה, בזמן חטא העגל היה פה כמה שעות, אבל הוא לא היה עם עם ישראל מוישה רבינו, היה בהר 40 ועוד פעם, הרבה זמן הוא לא היה. אז מראה שהוא חזר כמו אבא שמחכה לילדים, והיה כאן מוישה, איפה הילדים שלי? והיה כאן מוישה, אז כל הדס בני ישראל, ככה תודים ישראל אומר.
המחשבה שלו היה, איפה ילדים?
אז הוא אמר אז כשאני יושב פה ומחכה לנו שהגענו, אז אנחנו הגענו. אנחנו מבקשים
I know the song. I know the song.
אתם יודעים להגיד קדיש?
הוא משהו מכיר שלי.
Maybe he wants to
You know the
say
song?
Kaddish.
No, you want to know
I know the song. You know the song? No? It's a different English. Not Shari Shemayim? No?
שכוח גדול, תודה רבה. אוקיי.
Father and son.
אוקיי. מאיפה אתם? בני ברק, יפה. אתם מז'ץ?
אני בבני ברק, הוא גר בטבריה.
לא, אני שואל, איזה חסידות? They're Medzhybizhers. He's from Bnei Brak, the son is from Tiberia. One's the Netziv of Shalom, written by the Holocaust survivor who lived until the year 2000. Not here. He's a son or grandson of Islam Rebbe. Big influence, very resonant books, very contemporary. People read them and learn them. Very popular. You've heard of Netziv of Shalom? Sounds familiar? It's one of those you want put it on your bucket list of something that people learn widely. Brief about Slonim is just that. I knew somebody who was a Slonim Chassid when I was at YU, and and I asked him, what's Slonim? If everybody has to define their Chassidus in different hashkafic terms, and he said, well, the Rebbe broke down life, and he said every day in your life you're confronted with decisions. That's essentially what people are. We're here making choices in the world, and so what a Slonim Chassid tries to do, what the Rebbe taught us to do, is line up your options and consider them carefully and just decide which way to go, which one is the one that'll take you to Hashem. And then you do it. So I heard that and I thought, isn't that Judaism? To which he said, yeah. I said, isn't that Judaism? And he said, yeah, but we actually attempt to do it.
Very good.
What's the name again?